Okay, preparing to live stream. You should see now saying it's being live streamed. Setting up your meeting. I can see your thumbs up. That's good news.
Yes.
Thank you everyone for your patience with us. And we are live on YouTube. Wonderful. And now let me just make you co-host.
And we are right in time.
Are you good? Are you co-host, Eugenia?
Yes,
Can you see the
I'm co-host. Perfect.
Fantastic. I will now be silent and allow the wonderful meeting to continue. Thank you, everyone. Have a lovely day.
Great. Nigel, do you want to start sharing your screen?
Yes,
now that
I
we
can.
are live on YouTube and everything works. Just put the first slide and then we will say a few words before you start, but just to have you there. So first of all, I would kindly ask everyone that is not Nigel to please mute your microphones. I will keep an eye and try to mute microphones that I see on, but I would like everyone to do it for themselves if they can. So I think we are right in time. Would you like me to start already? Shall we give it 1 or 2 more minutes? I hear.
Can you hear me clearly?
Yes.
Is my volume all right?
Yes.
Good.
Perfect. Kashish, do you want me to start? Do you want to wait a minute or two?
Yes, please, you can start, I guess.
Great. Perfect. Great. Thank you, everyone, for being here. I am Eugenia. I am from Lectures Without Borders. I will just say in 1 minute what Lectures Without Borders is. So Lectures Without Borders is an NGO that is run by volunteers that want to do science talks in schools, basically. We do mainly 2 types of things. One is whenever a scientist is traveling somewhere, we find a school that wants to host them during their trips. That can be for a conference, can be for holidays. And they come to the school and they give a science talk. And the other type of activity that we do is basically what we're doing here, that is webinars. We find interesting topics that maybe are of interest to the schools or that scientists want to talk. In this case, it was a collaboration with Art of Inquiry, since they are interested in and work a lot with astrobiology. Sorry, I really need people to please mute your microphones.
ठीक है हम स्किपी यहाँ से खरीद देगा और क्या बाकी वॉफी भी यहाँ नहीं मिल रहा है क्या वहाँ नहीं मिल रहा है क्या
Okay, sorry, I'm muting microphones. I was saying that if we're doing this in collaboration with Art of Inquiry, and it's a series of webinars on astrobiology that are specifically targeted at schools in India. And right now I will just let Kashish explain a bit more about this collaboration and about the series.
Thank you, Gina. So I'm Kashish, and first of all, greetings, esteemed teachers, students, and curious young thinkers from around the world, whether you are joining us here in the webinar or through the YouTube live stream. I extend a warm welcome to each and every one of you. It's an honor to have such a diverse and young audience joining us today for the captivating webinar on astrobiology, understanding the origins of life. But before we delve into the mysteries of the universe, allow me to introduce Art of Inquiry. So we are a vibrant community of curious young thinkers and passionate educators from around the globe. Our mission is to foster discussions about the universe, the mind, and the future of humanity. Through our one-of-kind online curriculum, we provide young explorers like yourselves with a unique opportunity to learn, practice, and support the art of inquiry. Our curriculum covers fascinating subjects such as physics, astrobiology, world building, artificial intelligence, and cognitive sciences, giving you a well-rounded and captivating learning experience. Now, let's turn our attention to our distinguished speaker for today's webinar. We are honored to have with us Professor Nigel Mason, OBE, a leading authority in the field of astrobiology and a professor of molecular physics at the esteemed University of Kent. Professor Mason's journey began with his groundbreaking research on the simultaneous absorption of energy from photons and electrons to excite an atom, a process which was predicted theoretically in the 1930s but not previously demonstrated experimentally until Professor Mason's PhD studies and early postdoctoral studies. This work led to his being awarded a Royal Society University Research Fellowship, which allowed him to form the Molecular Physics Group at University College London. With a wide-ranging expertise spanning astronomy, planetary science, and molecular physics, Professor Mason focuses on the intricate interplay of physical and chemical processes in planetary systems. His work explores the origins of life on Earth and the tantalizing possibility of life existing beyond our planet. Currently, he also serves as the president of Europlanet, Europe's largest forum for planetary sciences, solidifying his commitment to advancing our understanding of the cosmos. So on behalf of Art of Inquiry, Lecturers Without Borders, and the entire audience eagerly awaiting your presentation, I extend a warm welcome to you, Professor Nigel Mason. Now the screen and mic is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and good evening, everybody. Very pleased to talk to you this evening. I'm going to give you a presentation of about 30 minutes, talking about astrobiology, what it is, but also then look at some of the challenges, the science challenges that we are trying to address. But because many of you are at school, I would also like to finish by talking about some career aspects, which might make you focus a little bit and think a little bit about what you might do in this field in the future. As has already been said, I also coordinate the Europlanet Society and the Europlanet Research Programme, which is a large interdisciplinary multinational programme to study planetary science and the origins of life. It's mainly based in Europe, but we do have collaborators and colleagues in India, particularly Professor Sivaramanan at the Physical Research Laboratory, Ahmedabad. So, space. We are an extremely exciting period in space exploration. We are entering a new era to study space. And we believe that it's going to be one of the last great human adventures. We've obviously explored our own planet. And if we go back 200 or 300 years, we can think about the great science explorations of different parts of our own world. We are now having the opportunity, we have the science, we have the technology, and we have the desire to move outside our planet. Not only going into space, not only being able to go to places like the moon, but the plan is that within the next 10, 20 years, within your lifetimes, we will establish permanent habitable structures in space, be they space stations around the Earth or around the moon, on the moon, and perhaps latterly at Mars. But we don't go into space only to explore it. We go into space to have the opportunity to exploit and to do science and technology that we can't do on Earth. For example, the moon will be a classic example of where we might be able to mine some minerals which we need for technologies on Earth without actually endangering the habitats on Earth. So, for example, many of the rare metals we might be able to collect on the moon or in asteroids. On Earth, they might be at the bottom of the oceans or in areas which have unique habitats that we wouldn't want to disturb. So the next step of space exploration is not only to go into space, but also to establish permanent bases in space and explore space. And I'm fortunate in the fact that we're giving this talk today, because only 3 hours ago, India launched the third of its missions to the moon. I hope some of you may have a chance to see this. So India is a space power. It will hopefully be one of the few countries to actually have land an instrument on the moon and have a mission on the moon. And it will be going to the South Pole, which is considered as one of the key places, the landing sites, for where we might establish the first lunar bases, both for astronomy, building telescopes on the moon, but also because the South Pole will have some of the resources that we need, like water. We can actually generate fuel, and we can use the lunar regolith to build habitats. So India's mission is an incredibly exciting next step, but it also shows the scientific reach and the global reach of the work that we're doing. So what are the science questions? What are the questions of astrobiology? What do scientists want to do when we go into space? Well, I guess the key questions are these, which have perhaps fascinated humanity for hundreds of years. Indeed, many of the early religions perhaps may also have discussed this. The first question is are we alone? Are we the only planet-bearing life forms on it? Or is there other life forms out there in our own solar system and beyond that in the outer solar systems? And if their life is there, how can we detect it? If, and we could discuss this in the questions, perhaps when we find it, is that life going to be similar to what we have on Earth, or is it going to be different? These questions also link to the question of how did life begin here on Earth? What is the origin of life on Earth? We need to understand that to understand perhaps how life may form and be existent on other planetary systems. This field of study of research for life, the origins of life on Earth, and exploring other systems for life forms, this is this topic of this new field called astrobiology. We like to define astrobiology as a very interdisciplinary field. It combines astronomy, biology, chemistry, and physics. Perhaps one of the nicest definitions is the one which is used by both ESA and NASA. Astrobiology is the study of the origins, the evolution, the distribution, and the future of life in the universe. How, as we move off our planet and go through our solar system, how will we affect life elsewhere? And there is a real possibility that this century we can answer these two key questions. We can answer the question, is there life on planets or moons in our solar system? Can we identify evidence for life in other planets around other stars? And can we understand how life begins? What are the ingredients necessary for life? So what I thought I'd do is to give you a guideline of the 10 great unsolved mysteries of astrobiology, 10 areas of science and technology which we are currently investigating as part of this wider field. And of course, I could give you a webinar on any single one of these 10, but I thought it might be useful to give you the overview of the 10. Now, when we do this, there was a famous American politician who gave a speech concerned with actually finding weapons of mass destruction or not in Iraq, and this is Donald Rumsfeld. But he came out with quite a classic expression, which is really a philosophical comment, but very appropriate for astrobiology. And that is, there are the known knowns. These are the things that we know that we know. We know the science, we know some of the basic science. We know how DNA is structured. We know how a planet, we have a good idea of how a planet may form. We have an idea of the various historical ages of the history of the Earth. There are also things, what we call the unknowns. That is to say, there are the things that we don't know. We know that life began on Earth. We don't necessarily know when. We know life evolved. We know there was at some stage, the Earth turned into a photosynthesis and oxygen atmosphere, but we don't know the details of that. We know that there are planets around other stars, exoplanets. And we know that they have atmospheres, but we don't yet know if those atmospheres can be characterized as livable, as we know it, or any evidence in those atmospheres of things that might indicate life. But there are also many things, what Rumsfeld called the unknown unknowns. Those are the things that we don't know, And that's a philosophical comment, but it's also true. We don't have a model of how life began on Earth. And that is our great unknown. Eventually, hopefully, we are hoping that we will answer that question. We'll be able to do that. And then that unknown will become a known. But astrobiology is not a clean science. It is not one that you can say, oh, it's like the laws of physics, laws of motion, or the chemical reaction rates, that you know how things work. Astrobiology has many channels in which of things that we don't know. So here are my top 10 challenges for astrobiology. The first one is, we have an Earth-centric view of life. So the first question we have to ask is life based on something else? Is there life that is not DNA-based? All organisms currently are known on Earth use carbon compounds for the basic structure and their metabolism. All use water as a solvent, and all are therefore either DNA or the simpler RNA to control their replication. It is possible, theoretically, that other life forms could exist using other biochemistries. And this is how life may evolve somewhere else. And this brings us in a very strong link to a topic called synthetic biology, where in the laboratory, we're trying to build systems that can self-replicate, which might give indications of alternative types of life. So, for example, Carl Sagan suggested that silicon germanium could replace carbon. In the original Star Trek series, which some of you may once have seen, there is a whole episode dedicated to a life form which is based upon silicon called a horta. We've also had suggestions that the phosphorus, which is used in DNA, could be replaced with arsenic. It has many of the similar chemical structures. So maybe a life that used arsenic rather than phosphorus to form a new type of DNA might be possible. All current terrestrial life forms require water, but life could exist in other solvents like ammonia or formamide or hydrocarbons, or even in sulfuric acid lakes. And we know that the possibility is that we've launched an ESA mission called JUICE to the moons of Jupiter, that they may well have, or they do have sulfuric acid ices. So maybe they have very acidic like liquid oceans in which life would have to adapt. The moon of Saturn, called Titan, is the first one where we see rivers and lakes not made of water, but have made of methane and other hydrocarbons. Could other life use that as a solvent? The second challenge is life a universal phenomena? We only know life on one planet, in our one solar system. Are we a very special case? Is there something very special about our star, our solar system, and the way it's evolved? Or are those conditions actually very common across the universe? This is one of the great challenges and one of the great searches for all the exoplanet missions which are being launched in the next decades. The search for new Earths. We have found some which look quite similar to Earth. They're in the right sort of temporal region, they have the right temperature, they have liquid water, etc. But we need to know a lot more about how the chemistry of star and planet formation, of how all these exoplanets form, and whether they emerge to be habitable planets. The Earth is interesting because it's coupled to its moon, and that again is very appropriate today with the launch of the Indian mission. It was formed, the moon was formed as part of a large collision in the early stages of the solar system, and the two things collided, and then the moon formed from some of the fragments and the Earth from the other part of the fragments, and they form this binary system. We know the moon plays an important role. It stables the climate, it produces tides, and indeed in the early days the tides were much higher than today. We believe that there may be that tidal movement may also play a very important role in the formation and assembly of the chemistry of molecules. So is a moon necessary? Is a planet with a moon necessary for the formation of life? And indeed, that's one of the main reasons for why we like to study the moon. In the chemistry side, in the life science, the next challenge is something called chirality. Life and the biological molecules of life are formed with something rather peculiar. They all have particular properties about how they interact with and react with light, and this is called chirality. So all sugars on Earth are right-handed, and all amino acids are left-handed. We can make the opposite. In the laboratory, we can make right-handed amino acids and we can make left-handed sugars. Indeed, often when we make them in the laboratory, we do make them in a 50-50 mix. Some bacteria actually convert right-handed amino acids into the left hand, but they can't use the right-handed ones. So why has life as we know it emerged? I'll give you an example. Lemon and orange are made of the molecule that actually gives the taste of a lemon and an orange are the same. It's limonene. But one-handed tastes very sweet, like the orange. The other one tastes very bitter, like the lemon. Why has life chosen only one chirality? Or elsewhere in the universe, is perhaps life chosen the other-handed of the chirality? It will have the same chemistry, it will have many of the same properties. So why has life chosen this? And if we go elsewhere, will it be opposite? This leads us on to the question of how do biomolecules assemble? We understand the chemical evolution. We understand with telescopes like the JWST that many of the regions where stars and planets form have a rich chemistry. Indeed, that chemistry may play a very important role in the actual formation of stars and planets. But how, when we formed all these molecules, how do they become assembled? How do we start from a group of chemical mixture, a cauldron of chemistry? What makes them assemble to form the structures that we need for life? For example, cellular structures like membranes. And this is the topic of much synthetic chemistry. Many parameters may determine how those molecules react and assemble. The pH, the concentrations, what solvent they're in, the degree of solvation. This is one of our great unknown unknowns. We don't know how this happened, but we obviously know it happened at least once, otherwise we would not be here. Once life starts to form, and we believe in the early Earth was formed about 4.5 million years ago and became stable, if you like, about 4.2 billion years ago. We know that the prebiotic chemistry was starting in that period of 4.2 to 4 billion years. But we know that life emerged very rapidly. Life evolved only after about 3.6 billion years. We can actually get the evidence of first things that we see as life, self-replicating systems. That's very fast. Is it inevitable? Once we start the process and once we start to get the prebiotic chemistry in the first forms of life, does life automatically find a way to continue to evolve? Or we need some very special conditions to switch from the evolution of one type of life to another? Perhaps the most interesting one is the idea of photosynthesis. Photosynthesis sustains life on Earth today. It produces the oxygen atmosphere, and at some stage, life switched to being a photosynthetic world. And that was very important, because although life began between 3.5 and 4 billion years ago, it wasn't based on photosynthesis. It was about another billion years before photosynthesis came. Why did life choose photosynthesis? The color of our vegetation, the green color of our vegetation, and the way that the photosynthesis works by sunlight is coupled to the type of star that we have. We have a very yellow star. So you won't be surprised to know that therefore green plants like to absorb that preferentially to other wavelengths of light. But it wouldn't take much to change the mechanisms so that molecules which do photosynthesis could be switched to absorbing blue light or red light. So therefore, if we found another planet with other vegetation on it, doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be green. It could be red, it could be blue, because it would depend upon how that photosynthesis has developed and in turn, what type of star it is. Now, most life that we might expect to find is likely to be bacterial. Most of the age of the universe, most of the age of our solar system, if somebody was looking at Earth, they would only see for much of its history the sort of algae and plants and simple plants, because more complicated life has only been around for a very small fraction of the history of the Earth. But let us assume that intelligent life does develop elsewhere. The question always is, why haven't they been in contact? Why haven't they visited us? Maybe some of you think they have. But SETI asks the questions of why they haven't made contact. One of the questions may be a philosophical one. The human brain and the human mind is very inquisitive. Many other animals are not inquisitive. So you could have formed a form of intelligent life that frankly doesn't care about what's happening outside its planet. And this brings you the idea of intelligence and curiosity. Humans are intelligent, but they're also curious. We like to find things out. My cat is also intelligent. Dogs are intelligent, but they are not curious in the way that we see it. Are we as humans, and therefore the evolution of mammals, is that necessary for the evolution of life as we know it? But it was a fluke. The fact that the mammals today and that we today dominate the Earth is because we had some cataclysmic events. We had the formation of the moon as part of the forming of the process. But the world was dominated by dinosaurs. And then one cataclysmic event wiped out the dinosaurs and all their type of life and left those small little rodents, mammals, from which we evolved. They survived and took over. If you watch the Jurassic Park movies, you can imagine what would happen if that hadn't happened. Would we end up today with a planet sharing it with the dinosaurs? Would the dinosaurs have become evolved and become more independent? How would the world look if we hadn't had that event? And therefore, on another planet, maybe going through a similar system, maybe a cataclysmic event, something might be necessary to decide whether the planet evolves into in a way where intelligent life, if you like, evolves, or maybe life doesn't evolve at all, or maybe life was starting to evolve, and maybe may have been intelligent, and the civilization may have been developing. It may have got to the age of the Stone Age or the Romans, and then a cataclysmic event may have destroyed it. It wouldn't have taken a much bigger impact than the one that killed the dinosaurs to essentially wipe out all life on Earth. But let us think that one day in your lifetime, you will wake up in the morning and there will be a news alert. Life has been found. One of our Mars missions has found life on Mars. One of our telescope missions has shown evidence that there is photosynthesis. There is evidence that plant life is existing on a planet around another star. What will that mean for humanity? What will that mean about exploring? What will it mean about how we treat and consider ourselves in the universe and how we explore the universe and the solar system? All of these topics, I hope I've shown you, are open-ended. We don't have answers to those questions. This is what we are trying to do. And this is why space, the exploration of space, working in space, for young people should be an area you could consider for space careers. Space careers comes in many forms. You might want to be an astrobiologist that looks for and investigates life outside the planet Earth. But there are other jobs. To do those missions, you may need to become an aerospace engineer because we can't build the spacecraft and the missions without building the spacecraft to launch them and to go there. You might want to be an astrophysicist that looks at how the planets and stars and galaxies form, or even talk about how the universe formed in the Big Bang. But you might want to be a software developer. India is very strong in the software business. Many software engineers would have been working on the mission that was launched today because all of the spacecraft and the satellites and the Curiosity rover have to be programmed. And many of you may have had talks about this, but machine learning and artificial intelligence may well be an incredibly important part of being able to send probes into our solar system and beyond to exploit the idea of artificial intelligence. If you're going to look at life on Earth, you have to go and find the oldest rocks in the world. You have to look and see how important that is. And that's what geologists do. But if you go to other planets, you want to look at the material on other planets. If you're going to build a lunar base on the moon, you don't want to take all your concrete or your material up there. It would be too expensive. So you would like to use what's on the moon. You particularly would want to use the lunar regolith, the lunar soil, to make bricks, etc. So you need to understand that, and the same for Mars. And of course, if we're talking to all these satellites and everything we launch, then we have to have the satellite tracking systems, the communication systems, etc. That might be a job you have to do. And so there are many areas of academic research: astronomers, electrical engineers, rocket engineers, people who are building new materials. These are all careers that you can have. So here are just some again: geologists, physicists, biologists, climatologists, chemists, space medics, designing experiments and doing the engineers to build the spacecraft, IT and software. And there are basically also non-technical careers. These include all the sales teams because the satellites and so on no longer are just built by government. They're often what we call a public-private initiative. If you look at it much in America, you will see the Elon Musk, etc. You need to have business strategy. We need to educate a whole generation of students. We need teachers. We need academic lecturers. But also, if we're sending things into space, we need to talk about the insurance. We need to talk about space law. And some people are even considering things like space tourism. So the future is the area of what we call new space. Earth observation systems to look at our own Earth and to explore our own Earth. To build the satellites that both do satellite communications looking out, but also looking down at the Earth, and how we communicate with them. How do we build the next generation of rockets and launch systems which can take us to the moon and Mars and beyond? And as we go more and more into space and we put more and more things into space, how do we get rid of the things up there? What about the debris and the waste management? There might be a commercial opportunity for people who are rich enough to go into space and to do space tourism. Of course, we have the whole exploration program. If we're sending people into space, we have to think about how they will survive in space. It's a very hazardous environment, lots of radiation. So we need to talk about space medicine. How do we feed people in space? How do we build, if we're going to build a lunar base or a Mars base, can we grow some of our own food? At the moment, I have some summer students working on to see what will grow in mimics of Martian soil and lunar soil. The types of material and the designs of the materials that we take into space in the rockets, they all need to be considered. And should this just be a free-for-all? Well, everybody goes in. If we start to mine the moon, can anybody go? Is it just like a big gold rush? Or should we have laws and space policy to determine how is it safe to bring some of this material back from these places? And as I said, one of the ways people are talking about linking the materials and so on is the ideas of space mining. If you want to do astrobiology and origins of life research, this is a very nice diagram put together now about 20 years ago by people when they started to talk about the field of origins of life on Earth and astrobiology. And all these little yellow boxes here, you could effectively just choose one of those boxes and a couple of those arrows, and that would determine what you might spend your entire life doing as a researcher, either academically or maybe with industry. And you can see the vast range of questions that we need to understand if we're going to understand life on Earth and life beyond Earth. And you can do this in India. As I said, today you have the launch of Indian mission to the moon. India is a serious space provider. It has launch capacity. It actually has the world record for launching the most number of satellites in one launch. I think it's 111, and I think that's believed that to be linked to a number of Hindu gods. But that's the world record, that they can launch a lot of these small satellites into space. There are many universities and research centers in India which are world leading in this field. The Physical Research Laboratory in Ahmedabad, for example, where my colleague worked, is well recognized around the world for studying some of these astrobiology problems. So I hope that's given you an overview of astrobiology. I hope I've given you some ideas about the questions we're trying to answer, for which we don't have answers yet. That is the excitement. That is what makes us do what we want to do every day and go into labs and build missions. But I now hope that for the next half hour, you have a chance to ask me questions or comments on that. I have provided the PDF of those slides. So if anybody would like to have them and use them, you're more than welcome. And they can perhaps be circulated afterwards. So now I hope to take some questions. But remember, I may not have all the answers.
Great, thank you so much. Kashish, do you want to start with questions or go?
Don't be shy.
I know what's happening. Kashish cannot unmute herself. There you go. Sorry, that was my fault.
Thank you. That was a remarkable presentation, Professor Mason, and I also learned a lot of stuff from your presentation. So yeah, now it's the exciting part of the webinar, the questions. We do have a question here about a student is asking that they couldn't understand the concept of left-handed and right-handed in chemistry. So they want you to explain that.
Okay. So if you have two molecules, the structure of the molecules, you have your hand, right? You cannot superimpose one on the other. They are mirror images of each other. If you look at them, if you look at your hands in a mirror, if you look in a mirror, you see the opposite structure. So the molecules are assembled in the same way. They consist of the same atoms, but the order in which they are formed is different. That means that they react slightly differently. In biology terms, because DNA is a molecule where a lot of the molecules interact in a particular way, it has a helical structure, or in various drugs, those drugs, if they are one type of handedness, they may have one reaction, and if they are the other type, they may have another. And the most famous one is a drug that was done in the 1960s for thalidomide. If you make it in a laboratory, you make it in 50-50. One type was good, and it basically prevented or reduced the effects for women of morning sickness. But unfortunately, the other one, when it was incorporated, led to birth defects. And this is the problem in drugs. So this is the type of way. It's this way in which those atoms are assembled and lie. That's the chirality. Now, life has determined that all the sugars are structured in one particular way. All our amino acids are structured in one particular way. They could be structured in the mirror image, the same atoms in the same order, but they are slightly different structures. And that means that life has picked one type of molecule over another type of molecule. We have no idea why. But it's very strongly linked to then also how DNA self-replicates and therefore how we reproduce.
Yeah, that was a really nice explanation. And we have one more question. It's about how do we search for life in the universe? I guess it's about the life detection missions.
Well, there are two different ways of thinking about that. There is life in our own solar system where we can get to. So we can go to Mars, and we are on Mars. And therefore, we are looking for life as we know it on Mars. Now, obviously, there are not Martians or Martian trees or something on the surface. That would be easy to find. What we're looking for is bacterial life. And therefore, we have to think about how we would discover that. Now, maybe that life isn't live anymore. Maybe it was that life on Mars was there in the early part of Mars, but died out. And therefore, we might be looking for fossils. Just like on Earth, we look for the fossils of the earliest forms of life. And so that's what you're trying to do. But if you're trying to look at a planet around another star, we can't go there. So we have to turn the question around. If we were sitting on that planet looking at Earth, how would they know that we're here? So we have to think about what signatures, maybe atmospheric signatures, something in our atmosphere that shows, for example, that there is something which is due to life. In photosynthesis, this is for example, the conversion of CO2 to oxygen, and we have a cycle. In the summer, the plants absorb the photosynthesis and they give out oxygen. In winter, the plants go dormant. So you have a kind of sawtooth pattern. You see something that is due to the seasons and is not due to temperature. So it's not just due to a temperature variation, it's something to do with the seasons. Other things that you might look for are evidence of an industrial society, molecules and so on that don't occur naturally and probably have to be made by industry, by an industry. That would tell you you have an advanced civilization. You might look for things like chlorophyll, which is what you identify from space. If you look in space and you look for chlorophyll, that's how you see there's all these plants, all these forests, all these sort of things. You also see the plankton in the sea that way. So we try and look for what we call spectroscopic signatures in exoplanets, what we call biosignatures in exoplanets. That's how we are trying to do that.
This question really made me remember about the recent discovery about the 6th essential ingredient for life on Enceladus. So yeah, so I have been wanting to ask you, like, what is your opinion, like, as a planetary scientist? How do we know that, okay, that we have these 6 essential ingredients there, but still we cannot prove that, yeah, there is life?
No, because if you look for the 6 ingredients, the 6 atoms, if you like, that make up the DNA of phosphorus is perhaps the one that people don't think of. But you've got hydrogen, you've got carbon, you've got oxygen, you've got nitrogen, you've got sulfur, you've got phosphorus. You're looking for those molecules that might be there. Now, that's life as we know it. That's because we know that that's the way that the DNA has been evolved. As I said in the talk, it may be that phosphorus could be replaced with something else, like arsenic. And there were talks about that many years ago, where people thought momentarily that they may have found an organism that used arsenic rather than phosphorus, but unfortunately it didn't prove to be true in the end. So it's a mystery, it's a puzzle. You have to put the different bits together. But as you said, that is the purpose of the JUICE mission. We have these icy moons. These moons are covered in an ice layer, but we know there's an ocean underneath. We believe that ocean is warm enough, if you like, to maybe have hydrothermal vents, which we have on Earth, which is where many people believe that's where life began on Earth. It's a rich chemistry, which makes that prebiotic chemistry to make those small first cellular type organisms. But you have to look for the ingredients. Indeed, if you find some stars that don't have that some stars don't have those ingredients, that a star system forms and there's no phosphorus, then maybe we shouldn't be looking for life in those planets, because if that star system never had enough phosphorus, then there'll never be enough DNA, and therefore life as we know it won't be there.
So now that you said something about the water underneath the ice, it made me think back of this question that is in the chat that says, if the water is underground, how do we know that it's there? Like, maybe not talking about the ice one.
Yeah. Okay. So you have something. We use radar. We use ground penetrating radar, and you basically send a signal into the planet, and it bounces back. So it penetrates underneath the ice, and you see density changes. And the density changes tells you whether it's pure rock or whether it's water or whether it's ice. And you can start to put a picture together from those type of maps. So that's how we know that there is water underneath these icy moons. Of course, we are sometimes lucky that we get we sometimes see a little plume coming out. We see a kind of like a little volcano throwing things out. So we know that there was water underneath, and it comes through the surface in a little volcanic eruption, and we can see some of the water being pushed out. Even if we don't have that, we are clever enough now to use techniques like radar to understand what the inside of the planet looks like, or the moon looks like, and that's how we know that there's water there and where it is.
There was a similar question here. A student is asking that if there is underground water on Mars, then how can it be detected by using our satellites?
As I said, we use radar and other things like that to do that. So we know where the water is underneath on Mars. So at some stage in the early part of Mars, when it was the same as at the early age of the system of the solar system, Mars and Earth were very similar. And we had oceans and Mars had oceans, not as deep as on Earth. And the gravity on Earth is less than the gravity gravity on Mars is less than the gravity on Earth. So its atmosphere wasn't held together. Much of that atmosphere left, and gradually also as Mars doesn't have such a strong solid core, iron core, it didn't have the plate tectonics. It slowly slowed down, and therefore the water gradually evaporated from the surface. But it can still be under the surface. We know from the rovers that is dug down underneath the soil that we found ice. We found particularly carbon dioxide. the Martian ice caps, they have poles like the Earth, and that makes up made up mainly CO2 and water. So we know that water was there. We know that liquid water was there because we can see on the surface evidence of things that might have shown there were once rivers and there were lakes and there were streams. So we know at some stage in its early history, it looked very Earth-like, and therefore it could have been that life could have evolved very similar to the early Earth. We know, however, that water now in ice form, it's in the poles, and it's underneath the surface. And we know which pits of Mars, if we drill down deep enough, we would come to ice, carbon dioxide ice and water ice underneath the surface. Some of it might be liquid, but most of it probably is still in ice form because of the way that the planet has cooled.
That's an interesting explanation. We have a next question about what is the future of life on Earth and beyond?
Okay, interesting question. Well, it kind of depends on lots of issues. The future of life on Earth, well, that kind of depends what your generation in this room do. We've got to address issues like the global warming. We've got to address issues about politics and wars and everything else. And that would be for each generation to make the right choices. However, in terms of space, what we're looking at now is establishing the fact that humanity will no longer, will be permanent in space. That we will have space stations, we will have lunar bases, we maybe have Mars bases, where people will go and work and live and work. And that is the next generation of space exploration. It's a bit like, 2 or 3 centuries ago, some people deciding to leave Europe, an example, and go to Australia. Of course, there were people in Australia, but then other people went out there. Now, we don't, on the moon, we won't be encountering Aborigine type populations, but we will be establishing ourselves here. And that very much is the plan. And they're good at technical reasons. We can build drugs in space, antibiotic resistant drugs in space that we can't build on Earth. We can build new types of materials in space because of the weightlessness conditions and the low vacuum, which we can't produce on Earth. So we can produce new technologies and new materials in space, which we can't do on Earth. There are people who have suggested that one way of solving the global climate change problem might be to put some reflecting telescopes, reflecting surfaces in space to reduce some of the solar irradiation on the Earth's surface. It's possible, probably rather too expensive. Probably there are better things for us to do, like just change the way that we use energy. But this is why we're going into space. So the theory is that humanity will now move to a new age where we don't only work, live, and do things on Earth, but we will do things around the Earth, around the moon, on the moon, and beyond. Indeed, at the moment, we're working on a book which will be published next year, trying to map out how a settlement of Mars might develop over the next 200 or 300 years, which in terms of human history is very small. When people go into space and they work in space, they may change. They may change their philosophies, they may change their attitude. It might, but all of these things probably have to be done as a human race. If we really want to go out and do that, maybe we've got to forget all these little very small tribal ideas of different countries, etc., and work together. Although I still hope we will play cricket competitively.
That's really interesting question, and it's really nice to think about how humanity is going to change in the coming years in the future. So coming to the next question, it's kind of interesting question. They are asking that that we do not have technology which is really developed to go out of our solar system, but how come there have been researches and predictions made for the existence of life outside the Earth and the solar system? And they're also curious that are there plants found outside our solar system? I guess they may be.
The answer to the last question is no, not yet. We are looking at exoplanets, and one of the things that we might first find is the evidence of a planet having something that we identify as vegetation because it shows the characteristic signature, for example, of photosynthesis. The other part of the question about the technology, about going outside our solar system. Yes, that's a very good question. We don't have the technology. We do, of course, now have our first things that were built by humans and have now left our solar system. That's the Voyager techniques. But if we wanted to go to another star, then of course we're a long way from doing that. We would have to develop new technologies. Some people talk about the idea of solar cells, for example, or as a way of doing that, or they call it solar sails, where you launch something, and because there's no resistance in space, there's no friction. Once you launch your satellite, there's very little to slow it down. So if you haven't got thrusters on board, you can't slow it down. So you just accelerate it, and over hundreds of years, it will eventually get to where you want it to get to. That's the only way that we can think of at the moment. We don't have warp drive technology. We don't have Star Trek technology that works like that at the moment. Otherwise, we have to just think about ways that we can do what we call remote sensing, exploring these places by light, by looking at the light that comes from the planets, etc., and looking at them that way. And that's what we have to do at the moment. But again, let's take that back. Again, how we human society evolve, so that maybe it's doing experiments that don't take. I mean, at the moment, most of these space missions, maybe some of them take 40 years between their concept, their built, their launch. It takes a long time to get to many of these planets. It takes 8 years to get to Jupiter. It takes maybe 12 or 15 years to get to Saturn. So if you are a student now, and you were to go to university now, and you were to do your PhD now on, say, the next mission to go to Titan, you probably will be getting the results of that mission when you're getting to my age and stuff, or even later. So these are lifetime projects. How do we then think about things as humanity, where it's several generations before we get the results? That again brings you that idea of philosophy and collaboration and how human society might evolve.
That's so interesting to think that how we all who are sitting in this room can be the pioneer of a space program. The result
Absolutely.
Later
Absolutely. This is why space science is very different to much other science. That we train people, and then basically we need people to. We may plan a mission now, but actually the people who may take the data, the people who may be actually analyzing the results, may still yet not even gone to university yet. So it could be you. Could be all of you. I see. I think the follow-up to that question. I meant the solar system by the Earth. If you're looking at plants outside our solar system, inside the solar system, no. This is why we're doing something called space agriculture. We're looking to see, can things grow in lunar soil? Can things grow in a Martian soil? Now we haven't brought any soil back from Mars. We have got a little bit of Apollo dust, and China's brought some stuff back. So we're looking to see what can grow in these soils. Because if we are going to go and live on the moon and so on, and people like fresh fruits or fresh vegetables, taking them from the Earth is very expensive. So maybe growing them there is better. And this is why people are now talking about space agriculture, growing things in space. And that should be possible. And that's what we're looking at the moment.
So I can read, sorry, that was my door. So I have a question that I wrote it in chat, but I can read it out loud. Which is, now that you said the thing about growing plants, it made me think of what you said earlier of producing medicines in space that we cannot produce on Earth. Which, first of all, I want to understand why we can produce things in space that we cannot produce on Earth. And then I also want to understand what would happen to those medicines when we bring them to Earth. If we cannot produce them to Earth, maybe it's because here they would explode if we want to do that reaction. But then wouldn't they when we re-enter them into Earth?
Okay, good question. The reason why we can do things in space that we can't do on Earth are two things. First of all, there is no gravity. So let us think that you're trying to make a material. Maybe you're trying to make metal. You're trying to make in Earth, you might take some metals to make an alloy, and you might heat them up in a furnace, and they mold together. Okay, but they do that under gravity. So naturally, there is a direction in which they flow under gravity. In space, you don't have that. So you can get the way in which materials can mix together is different. And you can form very pure compounds because there's no air bubbles. There are no things like that that might lead to cracks and so on, because there's nothing there. There's no atmosphere. So you can form very pure metals and you can form new types of metals because they are formed under this weightlessness gravity. And it's the same for drugs. The chemistry occurs differently when the molecules are under those conditions. So you can manufacture, let's take an antibiotic resistant drug. If you make it in space and it's a slightly different structure, no organism on Earth would ever have encountered it before. So you can design something that's actually going to be able to kill the bacteria on Earth because you've made it in conditions that it's never encountered before. When you bring them back down to Earth, if you've got those alloys, those metals together, and they have cooled and they come back down to Earth, they're stable. They're just hard piece of material. It's the same way you could ask the question the other way around. Why, when we take materials from the Earth up into space, don't they fall apart, or does the pressure break them up where you design them not to? And it will be the same with drugs and other chemical structures. The interesting thing in space is the whole idea of fluids and fluid dynamics is completely different type of science. This is why you've seen these things in the films where you don't have water in a kind of solid structure. It forms sort of blobs and everything else because, again, of the weightlessness. You can use that in drug design. Talk about the different types of drugs that you make, how you encapsulate things in drugs. So that's why people feel they can make them. But when you bring it back down to Earth, it's stable.
Perfect. Thanks.
So we have one more question. It's in 50 years' time, will we look back and say life on Earth was inevitable?
If you mean by that we understand that the way in which the Earth formed was the fact that it had all the conditions for life, and once the process started, that life was inevitable to emerge. If we understand the way that life forms and the way that life propagates, we might well have the answer to that. We can turn that around and say, can we find other planets where we believe that the conditions are such that life follows the same trend as us on Earth, and therefore has a very high likelihood of having evolved. But as I said, each step along the way might have small subtleties. And this is the kind of chaos or the fractal theory. Just a small alteration might determine whether life evolves one way or another. As I said, would we be having this conversation here today if that large asteroid had not hit and wiped out the dinosaurs? Because the mammals would never have been able to inherit the Earth and evolve from what we are today. So small, subtle corrections, which might determine whether life evolved, whether it chose to do photosynthesis or stayed as living off methane. These are the very small changes that might determine how life evolves, which we don't know yet. But I do think in 50 years' time, we will have many of the things that we don't know now, the unknown unknowns, the things we don't know, we will know. And then you will be reading your textbook in 50 years' time, and it'll be like quantum physics. Oh, until you invent quantum physics, nobody really knew anything about it. Now it's kind of like, well, it's obvious, isn't it? Yeah. It's obvious that quantum physics works. So we will probably get to that stage, I think, in about 50 years. There will be many things today that we don't understand, that if you were doing this webinar in 50 years' time and you're giving this webinar because you've been working in this area, you'll be able to say, well, 50 years ago, we didn't know the answer to that. Now, of course, you all know it's obvious because it's taught in undergraduate school. That's the way science goes.
I have
100 years ago, 100 years ago, we were still inventing quantum mechanics. Everybody now knows that quantum mechanics works. So
I have a final question. And while I ask the question, I would like everyone to check. There's 2 links on the chat. One is for feedback form and another one is for an attendance sheet. Both of those should be filled by the students. I will also, while I ask my question, share, in case people want to access that feedback form, I will share the feedback form again in the form of a QR code. so that people can flash it and enter there. I want to ask one special question that is, so far, everything we've been discussing was about finding life as we know it. Do you think that in 50 years from now, we will also try to find life as we don't know it? Because I find that many of the things that we're searching for, our water, our carbon, our methane, are things that we identify as being linked to life.
Yeah.
But if we think of something completely different.
Yeah, there's a problem there. Is how do you have a concept of something that you don't know? There's a bit of philosophy. It's discussed about the way the human brain works. The human brain likes to have center points. It sort of works on the basis that it has knowledge and it tries to focus on things that it knows. But that's the area of synthetic biology. The area of synthetic biology is to try and build new biological structures which aren't necessarily made up in the same way as the way life is chosen. And this is synthetic biology and synthetic life. Of course, there's another type of life which is artificial intelligent life, AI life. And some people might say that all civilizations and come to an end. But the AI technology, if we were to kill ourselves off or die out in the next 100 years, but we had instruments and developments and things that we'd sent out that were robotic and artificial intelligence, that would show that we'd existed. So I think it's a very good question about identifying alternative life forms. I think this is why the missions to Mars and to Titan and to the Jovian moons are so important, because we believe that they have the conditions for habitability and life as we know it. If we were to discover a type of bacteria or an amoeba or a small organism, and it will be that we look for. We'll be looking for that type of very simple algae type life forms. If we were to find one, the first thing we would want to do is to sequence it and to find whether it was like us, like the stuff we have on Earth, or whether it's different. And that will be a crucial step. Well, let's see. We know where to look. We have ideas of trying to identify things that self-replicate and survive. We know that's what things that are going to live. They've got to be able to do that, so we can look for that type of thing. We will see in the next 50 years if we find them or not. If we found them on Mars, I guess the first question everybody would ask is, because life may have moved from Mars to Earth or Earth to Mars, something called panspermia, the idea that things can move across the system on meteorites and other things. If it was to be found to be very similar to us, if it was found to be the same RNA, DNA components, then we'd probably say, okay, we found life, but it's still the same type of life. If, on the other hand, it operated in a different way, arsenic instead of phosphorus, for example, then we would have found a new type of life. And that would be big challenges, because maybe we should never go to Mars then, because we would contaminate it. And we shouldn't bring it back here, because it can contaminate us.
Good. Thank you so much for that answer. So in case that was not clear, the form that I had just shared, just because I got a message about it, was just for feedback. It will not ask you to sign in or to give your information in any way. The other form is for attendance, and that one was made by your teacher. And I don't think there's any more questions yet in YouTube. There were no questions. So Kashish, do you want to start wrapping up the webinar by thanking Nigel very much? It was amazing, Nigel. From my side, that's all I will say. And now I will give the floor to Kashish. Thank you so much. Kind.
I hope everybody enjoyed it, and I hope it makes you now engage in discussion. You can all talk to your teachers, look up material on the web, and think about what maybe you do in your future careers. We need space scientists, not just for astrobiology, but for all those other things. Satellite engineers, everything else. So we need people to build communication systems, satellite TV, everything. We need a lot of people in the space industry. So this talk today encourages you to do that. There are plenty of opportunities, and India has plenty of industry and companies who need people too. there is a big shortage of people around the world who want to commit themselves to exploring space in some way or another.
That was a wonderful presentation, and really thank you for taking your time and giving a wonderful webinar to these young explorers. And I hope to see some of them becoming astrobiologists and space scientists in future, and not just in traditional scientific careers, but even non-traditional scientific careers. The future is all about science, and the world keep changing, and we need more scientists. So
Absolutely.
I hope. So finally, as we draw the webinar to close, I formally want to express my heartfelt gratitude to each and every one of you. Your active participation and enthusiasm have made this event a resounding success. We hope that today's exploration of astrobiology has ignited a flame of curiosity within you. I hope so, encouraging you to continue pursuing knowledge and asking questions about the universe. The more you ask, the more you know. On behalf of Art of Inquiry and Lecturers Without Borders and the entire team involved in organizing this webinar, I extend my deepest appreciation to Professor Nigel Mason for sharing his expertise and enlightening us all with his profound knowledge. We are immensely grateful for your valuable contribution to this event. As we bid farewell, let's remember that the pursuit of knowledge knows no boundaries. Together, we can continue to unravel the mysteries of the universe, expand our understanding of life's origins, and shape a future where curiosity reigns supreme. Thank you, and until we meet again on our next exploration of the cosmos, keep questioning.
Maybe I visit India quite regularly. I'll be visiting my colleagues in India in the new year. So if there's any opportunity to meet any of you, I'll be very happy to come and see some of you. So I look forward to hoping to hear your exciting things that you do in the future. As I said, I have given the slides to the organizers, and I'm sure that they can circulate them and you can use those as areas for future discussion. So thank you very much for everybody for attending this evening as well. And I do obviously look forward to seeing where some of you may go, to boldly go.
Thank you. And thank you everyone at the audience especially, and for asking so many questions. And so let's wrap this webinar. And if you have any more questions, I saw that more questions were keep coming. So feel free to send those questions to us, and we can see that if I can send it to Professor Mason, maybe if he has time, and maybe we can answer the question. Yeah. So thank you, everyone. And until we meet again on our next exploration of the cosmos, keep questioning, keep seeking, and keep discovering.